Formula One this season, it's a bit like, well, have you ever seen one of those tightrope walkers?
Yeah.
You know, the ones way up high. And it feels like there's a hurricane going on around them.
Yeah, I get you.
It's a bit like that watching Max Verstappen right now. I mean, the guy's just on another level, isn't he?
Oh, absolutely.
Second in the driver standings, just 8 points behind Norris.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, how is he doing it with the car he's got?
Yeah, it's true.
Because when you look at the Constructors' Championship, Red Bull, they're sitting in third behind McLaren and Mercedes.
Yeah.
It's not exactly screaming dominance, is it?
No, not quite.
So can he really keep this up?
It's a big question.
I mean, there's all this talk about the RB21 being a bit inconsistent, you know?
Yes.
And then you've got the big changes within the team.
Yeah.
Adrian Newey and Jonathan Wheatley moving on.
Huge figures in the team.
It just adds to the uncertainty around Red Bull, doesn't it?
For sure. It really makes you appreciate what Verstappen is doing.
Yeah.
Pulling out these results when the team as a whole isn't quite firing on all cylinders.
Right.
It shows you what a special talent he is.
It does. And speaking of Red Bull and uncertainty, let's talk about that driver swap.
Yes.
Liam Lawson.
Out.
Yuki Tsunoda.
Back in?
It all happened during the break, and let me tell you, it's caused a bit of a stir.
Oh, I bet. The timing, the drivers involved.
Yeah, plenty to talk about.
Definitely.
And that's exactly what we're going to do today.
All right.
We're diving deep into Ralf Schumacher's take on all of this.
Interesting.
Now, he's a former F1 driver himself, right?
Sorry, yeah.
So he's been there, done that.
He knows what it takes.
And he's never been one to shy away from speaking his mind.
No, definitely not. Always interesting to hear what he has to say.
So let's start with what he had to say about Helmut Marko.
Okay.
Now, it's not all negative, you know?
Right.
Schumacher acknowledges that Marko plays a big part in bringing young drivers into F1.
Yeah, through that Red Bull driver program.
Exactly.
It's been so successful, hasn't it?
It really has. You can't argue with the number of talented drivers they've brought into the sport.
Absolutely. They've really shaped the grid over the years.
But here's where Schumacher starts to have some reservations.
Okay, I'm listening.
He thinks Marko can be a bit, well, demanding, shall we say.
Demanding?
And he doesn't think that young drivers are given enough time to prove themselves.
Interesting.
He specifically mentioned Liam Lawson.
Right, the recent driver swap.
Yeah, he said 2 races alongside Verstappen, that's just not enough to make a proper judgment.
It's a tough ask, isn't it?
It is. And then Schumacher brought up another point. Apparently the RB21.
The car itself?
Yeah, it's a bit of a beast to drive.
Oh, really?
Apparently so. Makes it even harder for a young driver to come in and make an impact.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that.
And all this is coming from Schumacher's appearance on the Sky F1 Backstage Box and Gas podcast, by the way.
Okay.
Just so you know where we're getting all this from.
Good context.
But it's not just about how individual drivers are treated.
Right.
Schumacher has some pretty strong opinions about the Red Bull team as a whole right now.
What does he say?
He called them a banda descabezada.
Now, I don't speak Spanish, but I'm guessing that's not a compliment.
It's not. It basically means a leaderless gang.
Wow. That's a pretty strong statement.
It is. And it speaks to this idea that the team is lacking direction at the top.
Like they're adrift.
Exactly. And Schumacher goes on to say that they seem to be constantly dealing with internal issues.
Always putting out fires.
That's it. And then he asks this really interesting question.
Yeah.
He wonders what Dietrich Mateschitz would think of all this.
Ah, the founder of Red Bull.
Yeah, the guy who built the whole thing.
He was such a visionary.
He was. And it does make you wonder, would he recognize the team as it is now?
With all this apparent turmoil.
Exactly.
That's a great question, isn't it?
It is. But if you thought that was harsh, wait till you hear what he said about Verstappen's role in all of this.
Okay, go on.
Schumacher is very clear on this point.
Right.
He says that without Verstappen, Red Bull would be sumergido en la mediocridad.
I think I'm picking up on a theme here with the Spanish. But what does it mean?
Basically, mired in mediocrity. Without Verstappen, they'd be nothing special.
Wow. He really thinks Verstappen is carrying the team.
He does. He even goes as far as to say that Verstappen is constantly having to pull the chestnuts out of the fire for them.
What does that even mean in this context?
It means that Verstappen isn't just driving well.
No,
He's having to compensate for other weaknesses within the team.
Interesting. So it's not just the car that's inconsistent.
Maybe not. Could be strategy calls, development pace, who knows?
Right, right.
But Schumacher's point is, Verstappen is having to do more than just drive the wheels off the car.
He's papering over the cracks.
Exactly. Now, this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay, hit me.
Schumacher hints at some disagreement within Red Bull's management.
Disagreement? About what?
About who should be in that second race seat.
Yeah. Ah, right. So we're back to Lawson and Tsunoda.
Yeah. Schumacher reckons that Helmut Marko is the one calling the shots on driver choices.
Okay.
But, and this is a big but,
go on.
Apparently neither Lawson nor Tsunoda are Christian Horner's first choice.
Wait. So the team principal doesn't agree with the driver selections.
That's what Schumacher is suggesting.
That's fascinating. You've got this potential power struggle going on within the team.
It seems that way, and if that's true, it adds a whole other layer of complexity to the situation.
Absolutely. It makes you think, how can a team function effectively when there's that kind of disconnect at the top?
Now, before we go any further, let me just take a moment to welcome any new listeners who might have just joined us here on the F1 Blog's YouTube channel.
Always good to have new folks along for the ride.
We're taking a deep dive into the world of F1 today, and as you've just heard, things are getting pretty spicy over at Red Bull.
Well, it wouldn't be F1 without a bit of drama, would it?
So to quickly recap everything we've covered so far, we've got Ralf Schumacher, former F1 driver, not holding back on his thoughts about Red Bull.
No, not at all.
He's questioned the way they handle young drivers. He's called them a leaderless gang.
A pretty damning assessment.
And he's basically said that without Max Verstappen, they'd be mediocre.
He's painted a pretty stark picture.
He has. And it really makes you wonder, what does this all mean for Red Bull's future?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Can they really stay at the top if they're not firing on all cylinders?
It's going to be tough.
And what about Verstappen?
Yeah, what about him?
Can he keep dragging them to good results?
Or will he eventually get tired of doing it all himself?
Exactly. It's a fascinating situation.
And we'll be here to analyze it every step of the way.
That's right. And if you want to make sure you don't miss any of our analysis, hit that subscribe button on the F1 Blog's YouTube channel.
We'll be covering all the big stories all season long.
But before we wrap up today, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay, go for it.
We've talked about the internal issues at Red Bull, the pressure on Verstappen.
Yes.
But think about this. What happens if those issues don't get resolved?
Right.
Could it actually push Verstappen away from the team?
That's a scary thought for Red Bull fans.
It is. I mean, how long will he put up with carrying the team on his shoulders?
Exactly. He's a fiercely ambitious driver.
He is. He wants to win championships.
And he might decide he needs to go elsewhere to do that.
It's a possibility, isn't it?
It is. And that would be a huge blow for Red Bull.
It would change the whole landscape of F1.
It would be fascinating to watch play out, that's for sure.
Absolutely. So that's something for you all to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of F1.
Always a pleasure.
Until next time.
See you then.